Okay, now let's continue rules for referring impedance. So why do we need to learn the rules for referring impedance? We need to look at first at this circuit. So we know that the transformer, if you look at this transformer, the primary side and the secondary side, it is not electrically connected. So there is no connection between primary winding and secondary winding. I mean, there is no electrical connection. It is connected only by a core. So it is connected only by a core. Ia bersambung dengan core saja. So the core passes through from the primary side to the secondary side, which it will induce the voltage at the secondary side and producing a current when the load is connected. So if you draw the circuit for a transformer, you will have this circuit where the primary side is not connected electrically dengan secondary side. If you look at this diagram, there is no connection between these two diagrams. I mean, electrically connected. So it is quite difficult if you want to do an analysis or troubleshooting, or if you want to design a transformer, if you are required to design it. So what they do is they combine the primary side and the secondary side into one circuit. So let's see this for an example. As I mentioned just now, the primary side and the secondary side is not electrically connected. So what do is they transfer all these components from secondary side to primary side, or they can transfer this R1 and all the components to the secondary side. Vice versa, you can transfer from secondary, this one is secondary, to primary, and this one is from primary to secondary. So you can transfer the component from primary to secondary, or you can transfer the component from secondary to primary. So there are rules you have to follow if you want to transfer these components from primary to secondary ataupun secondary to primary. So what kind of circuit diagram you expect to see if you transfer the components? Let's say in this example, you transfer this component from secondary to the primary. So you need to label all the yang kena transfer tu by a denoted di sini, kena label di sini dengan prime. So you need to label it with a prime. So di sini pun sama juga, ZL prime. So if you look at this formula, I believe you already have seen this equation where this is the turns ratio of a transformer from primary to secondary. This is for voltage and this is for current, and this is for impedance. So Z1 divided by Z2, you should have the turns ratio equal to A square. So how do you transfer this R2 to R1? So you know that let's look at first from R1. Let's say if you want to transfer this R1 to the secondary side. So let's focus first on the primary R1 refer to secondary side. So for rules for impedance, as you recall back, for impedance tadi, impedance equation tadi, Z1 divided by Z2 equal to A square. So similar to dengan R1 divided by R2 equal to A square. Now you want to transfer this R1 to the secondary side. So you need to, let's say you need to redenoted kamu punya R1 jadi R1 prime. So you just change di sini R2 jadi R1 prime. So R1 prime, if you cross multiply this one, you get R1 prime A square equal to R1. So R1 prime square, R1 prime is equal to R1 divided by A square. So let's say for example di sini, you want to transfer this primary component to the secondary side. So you need to label this one R1 prime X1 prime. So let's say for example di sini R1 prime di sini is equal to R1 divided by A square. What about X1 di sini? If you rearrange you punya equation ini jadi X1 divided by X2 equal to A square, you should get X1 divided by A square. So this is the equation for reference transferring from the primary to secondary side. So I hope you are clear on the primary to secondary side. Now let's look at what if you transfer from secondary to the primary side. Now let's change. Now we want to know what happened, what value if you transfer from this secondary to the primary side. So back to the original equation tadi, the original equation where R1 divided by R2 equal to A square. So you just rename this R1 jadi R2 prime. So you make this R2 prime as a subject. So R2 prime is equal to A square R2. So di sini R2 prime equal to A square R2. So sama juga dengan di sini X2 square equal X2 prime equal to A square R2. So let's look an example di sini. Let's look an example. Okay, so example 3.4, a transformer has 450 turns in the primary side and 45 turns in the secondary. So this is your N1 and this is your N2. The secondary coil is connected with the load impedance of 3 ohm. So this is your ZL. Now you need to calculate the turns ratio and the load impedance referred to the primary and the primary current if the coil voltage is 15 volt. So the first question is you need to calculate the turns ratio. So the turns ratio A is equal to N1 divided by N2 equal to 450 divided by 45, and this is your turns ratio. So di sini ZL1 divided by ZL2 equal to A square. Now you need to transfer this load impedance referred to the primary side. So you know that load is connected to the secondary side. So you need to rename this ZL1 jadi ZL2 prime. So ZL2 prime ZL2 prime equal to A square ZL2. So di sini A square ZL2. So ZL2 prime is equal to 300 ohms. So we finish the turns ratio and the load impedance referred to the primary. And the next one is we need to calculate what is the primary current if the primary coil voltage is 15 volt. So we need to calculate I1, which is the primary side. So I1 equal to V1 divided by the load impedance referred to the primary side. So 15 divided by 300, you get 0.05 ampere. So please do try the drill exercise 3.4, because next we are going to learn about the transformer under loaded condition.